This is the most common human chromosomal anomaly, and again, this is an inheritable mental retardation of males. This, very similar to Klinefelter's. Sometimes they're seen together actually with the two. They have this is one of these that's sex-linked recessive, basically meaning it's carried on the mother's X, and because males only have one X, that's why they demonstrate it. Does that make sense? It's one of those. Did you do genetics in one of your classes? Genetics is helpful with some of this, just because you kind of get an idea. You know, the female has an XX, the male has an XY. Some things are actually carried, like hemophilia. Certain types, most of the hemophilia is male, because it's carried on the woman's X, and you need to have both. You need to have all the X's to carry this gene in order to demonstrate it. But since men only have one X, and if it's carrying it, then they're going to demonstrate it. Whereas females are not as likely to demonstrate it because they're getting, the mother's X that kind of protects them, and the father's X. Does that make sense? Without going into a whole genetics lecture. So anyway, Fragile X is one of those, like hemophilia, that you really just see demonstrated in males because they only have the one X, and the X carries it. Okay, so they usually have a long, narrow face, prominent ears, macroorchidism, flat foot, scoliosis, a lot of aggression too sometimes with these patients. So autism, very highly linked with this. And again, the earlier the intervention, in terms of, there is no treatment, but the earlier the intervention in terms of stimulation, treatments, therapies, the better their result.
So we project.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, it's before you.
All right. Okay, ADHD. This is another spectrum disorder. Okay, very wide spectrum of what you can see here. So here comes our argument. All right. Are we better at diagnosing this, or is there something in the food, in the environment? Why are we having such a large population? Because this is another one of those diagnoses that has really boomed in the past 10 or 15 years. And many, like when you look at the amount, like if you do one of those graphs, those bar graphs or line graphs, and you see the amount of children that are diagnosed with this 10, 15 years ago versus now, you will see a large spike. Now, one of the arguments has been we have become much better at diagnosing this, and I would agree with that. I mean, I remember being in grammar school, and there was a boy that literally could not sit in his seat for more than a few minutes, and he would get up and walk around. And the teachers constantly were yelling, putting him out of the room, putting him in the corner. I mean, it was really, when I think about it, he truly had attention deficit. And back then, nobody diagnosed these things. They thought he was a bad student. There was something wrong with him. Why can't you sit and listen and pay attention? So I truly believe that there were many people who were not diagnosed who should have been. That being said, we have so many people being diagnosed. Are we misdiagnosing some? Or are we just better at catching it too? Or is there something in the environment that's leading to these, which is another whole thought. Like, what are we being exposed to in food? What are we being exposed to in our environment? Bill, you have a thought?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. Well, like I feel like we've learned more about it, and there are certain people, especially, I taught for a few years, that I had students that literally couldn't sit down. They kept getting up, and I'd be like, why are you walking around? Sometimes they would look genuinely confused to be like, I don't know. Like, they were just so busy. But then so many other people have it, and then I know people that have it too, that it doesn't seem like it's really affecting them all that much, and certain things that they were diagnosed with included stuff like inability to pay 100% focus with loud background noise. And I was like, I can't do that either, and neither can 90% of the population probably. So I think some of the criteria are probably a little too general, and they don't have the time to go through every single student in such a rigorous way to really determine who has it. So I feel that to play it safe, they hand it out because they're scared of the parents now, because that's the trend of this last 10 years. So they just hand it out like candy, and so parents can have their kids with more test time and all that other stuff.
Khalid?
I think this disorder probably gets scapegoated more than a lot of others. I've seen patients that have ADHD and the way they're active and everything, but I feel like some parents, either in their home, there's a lack of discipline or something, like timeout or something, and then it just leads to bad behavior. And instead of addressing that issue, they'd rather just take the easy way and get the medication.
There was a study done in the UK about
Where's the UK? They are very good.
6 or 8 years ago, and they found a direct link between artificial food colorings and preservatives and behavioural problems in children. As a result, a lot of the companies in England are now taking those products out before the government actually stepped in and said you have to take them out. And I believe now the aim across Europe is to reduce these artificial colours and preservatives significantly by 2015, I think.
Yeah, there have been definite things in diet that have been targeted as being unhealthy for children who are developing. So that being said, and we know that children who are exposed to certain things, like children exposed to lead, manifest like they have ADHD. So we know that children who are exposed to certain toxins will have a harder time concentrating, especially in the younger they are, the earlier years, because we know that their nervous system is still developing, especially in those first 2 years of life. So this is very big. So, go ahead, Bill.
I
So
mean,
those are definite.
yeah, I mean, I definitely agree nutrition can have an effect, but I also feel that people are very quick to blame nutrition now, just like McDonald's is being blamed for obesity, and McDonald's isn't going door to door and force-feeding people.
Like when
But,
people
I mean,
had lung
when,
cancer with smoking, yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, it's, I don't know, I feel like when I was growing up, and it wasn't even that long ago, but this whole organic push and all this other stuff really wasn't a big thing, but, I mean, I feel people aren't looking at the big picture, like what Talik was saying. Like, another thing that's increased is both parents working, so, like, there's, like, sometimes it's a kid home by himself, without any real, like, structure, and then there's other factors as well, internet, technology, all this other stuff in play, and it's, people are always looking for this one, like, one thing to
children
blame,
being
like a quick fix, and it's
Are we
it's
overstimulating
oversimplified.
children? Are we overstimulating children with TV, internet, music? Like, are they being overstimulated so that they can't focus
Or underactive.
or underactive?
I think I think it could be argued both ways, very wide, because look at children like in the Caribbean, because I remember when I was a child, I didn't have access to candies. It was all organic foods, because we would eat mainly from the farm. There was the chicken we have today, that wasn't the chicken, the meat we were fed.
There's nothing wrong with cheese from a can, I'll tell you that.
Huh?
I said there's nothing wrong with cheese from a can.
Oh, they were naturally, everything was just natural from the farm, and yet, when I was in school, I can remember a few boys who used to be just the class clown. And it doesn't matter what they do or the teacher did, it didn't make a difference. Now I'm looking at it, it was like, you're abusing the person who can't help themselves. So where does the inorganic food comes in? Where does there was no television much, there's only radio and newspaper, but there wasn't much in the Caribbean back then.
You still saw some people with what you thought were attention issue, yeah.
And it was definitely a attention issue, but where does all these new processes come in to affect that person? So I think it's broader than what we're looking at. We're looking at what we're seeing now, but I think this thing has been way back then, when people had no stimulation more than read or listen to the radio if you can afford a battery. So
I think one of the main things that we need to do with these types of children is rule out everything. So we start taking away the things that might be affecting their attention span. My daughter actually was allergic to the artificial food colorings. We had to give her only homemade foods, which I was very happy about. My ex wasn't so happy about it, because it made her job harder. But every time we gave her, she had food colorings of any description, be it from processed foods, from candies, wherever, she would start acting out. Her behavior would definitely change.
Yeah, sugar impacts children. Artificial, many of the preservatives even, a lot of the things, they do affect children. But what, Bill, you started to touch on this too, which I thought was interesting, is that how do we diagnose this?
I think before we diagnose this, we should send kids out to run as much as they can.
Yeah.
Give them less sugar, because once you put them in a room with that energy they have and give them sugar, they are gonna get nuts. So you let them out run,
A little quick
and then
10-mile
see if they
hike.
need
Yeah, that's good.
When
If you still have
One-
energy.
one
You got a
one
problem.
thing, I used to have attention problems when I was a little kid, right? And I was living in New York. My little cousin, he had lead poisoning, and I mean we used to like drink water right out of the hose outside. We didn't go inside, get sterile water or filter or nothing like that. I don't know if there was anything, but like it's something I had to work on, and like never was diagnosed with ADHD, nothing like that.
We
Now
could
I
love to
think
do
it's
that
fine.
from the hose. That was normal.
Yeah,
Well, I think
and
part
then
of the issue is the diagnosis. You know, it's not like you could take a blood test. Like we were saying, you can check somebody's genetic makeup and say, oh, you have Turner's. You know, there's an X but not a Y, you know, or there's an XX. There's no XX, it's just an X. We can't do that here. Okay, they're starting to look at levels of hormones, neurotransmitters in particular, you know, epinephrine versus norepinephrine, and they think there's an imbalance there that's not allowing somebody to focus. Epinephrine helps you to get ready, get you stimulated, but the norepinephrine helps you to focus that energy. And what they find is that some of these children have very high levels of epinephrine and lower levels of norepinephrine, so they have all this energy, but they can't focus it. Truly, when they're looking, and then things like Ritalin, which are what? Stimulants actually help people, because if you have this energy but you can't focus it because you're missing the norepinephrine, the stimulants will help you with that. And they're very effective when people truly have this problem. And so there is a component there, along with, obviously, everything has to be layered with behavioral therapies and worked on, and there's a lot of behavioral therapy that goes along with the medical. But for people who truly have an issue of focusing, because they might be off in their neurotransmitters, that has been shown to be very helpful. But the problem is the diagnosis is based on verbal reports from parents, teachers, people who come across the student, and it's not something that's seen, you know, it's got to be seen in multiple areas across the board, you know, multiple different situations. It can't just be that, well, every time they come to CCD on Sundays, they can't focus, but every other time they can. Or every time they come to school, they're having issues focusing, but yet when they go to, you know, after-school programs, they can. So again, it's got to be seen in multiple different situations on multiple occasions. But again, it's still one of these diagnoses that's not clear-cut. It's not so easy, like kind of what you were saying about like, oh, well then they give them all this range of what they need to do for the person, because they try to tailor it with the individualized education plan, but it's not this easy, oh yes, let's take a blood, oh yeah, your antibodies are high, so you had this, right? Like some of the other stuff we were talking about. It's not like that. It's more verbal and observational reports, you know, from multiple different disciplines, you know, sometimes more thorough than others in the diagnosis and in the plan, which gives it this vague, you know, for some cases gives it this kind of a vague and bad reputation too sometimes, you know. So I think it's hard because we're still struggling with the diagnosis piece of this, and because it is a range and how severe some people are with their attention versus others. Lee, just.
Okay.